Jesse, thanks for sitting down with me today. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Jesse, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you get into wheat breeding?
Sure. So I'm originally from a farm background in Kansas. And so with that, I went to school and was studying agriculture and kind of got into a genetics class. And from there, I kind of saw the power of plant breeding and the potential to make a difference in the world, working internationally and working in plant breeding scope. So from that was kind of the passion and the drive, and so the rest of it kind of history after that.
Fell into place.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm looking for your evaluation of the U.S. Wheat industry today, and how would you compare the U.S. industry compared to the rest of the world?
Right. So do you need to put a disclaimer that this is personal views? And
Jesse's opinions?
Yeah, not reflective of the... So I think, at least in the U.S., I think it's a really exciting time. We've had a huge private sector investment over the last 5 years or so. And so that has really brought a lot of dynamic energy, I think, to the wheat breeding, to wheat genetics, to the kind of the wheat community in the U.S. at large. So there's a lot going on there. I think if the U.S. industry is able to sustain that private sector investment, then there's a really bright future going forward. Just for example, this year, we had a really good conditions, a record crop in Kansas, and so I think the potential is really there. It's going to continue to be one of these things of fighting kind of tough environments and tough growing conditions where your wheat acres are usually at. And so, but I think with continued investment both on the public and private sector, there's a pretty strong future. The real catch is looking at kind of the return on investment in the private sector, especially is that we don't really have the wheat seed industry that you have in corn and soybean, both from the hybrid and then from the protected trait kind of scope. And so to sustain those companies and make sure they're getting a return on investment, I think it's going to take a little bit for the industry to sustain that. If you look relative to like a European or Australian type model where they have more endpoint royalties or much tougher legislation on seed, replanting seed, and then that basically facilitates all that direct return to the industry. So I think that's kind of the challenge on sustaining the investment. I think regardless of that, wheat is one of the big crops for the U.S. and so the public sector investment's really got to stay there as well.
Got to be big, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you've got research in a number of different areas: genetics, germplasm, bioinformatics, high-throughput phenotyping. What are you working on now that gets you really excited?
Yeah, so we got a couple of projects. Really, the fun ones are in like high-throughput phenotyping. We're doing a lot to develop like pheno apps, which are sort of smartphone applications to use for field data collection or for measuring plant traits through taking photos and stuff. And that's really exciting in my mind just because those kind of are really portable. So we take those to the developing world, you get a low-cost smartphone and really put some powerful tools in the hands of those breeders. So those projects and kind of in the scope of all the stuff we're doing with high-throughput phenotyping, working with UAVs now, and all of that's pretty fun, exciting. It's a little bit of research and a little bit of playing with fun toys and doing fun things.
Absolutely, fun's always good.
Yeah.
Fun's always good. Jesse, at the NAPB meetings here, there's a lot of talk about high-throughput phenotyping.
Yeah.
First of all, can you explain to us what that is,
right?
And why is that important for?
Yeah. So really, at least in my mind, if you define high-throughput phenotyping, it'd be something of measuring a plant trait that you need to have information on in the breeding program, and doing that in a scope that's much faster and higher throughput than what you can do currently by hand. And so whether that's something like plant height or maturity or even yield, you'd think about, okay, what are ways you can do that higher throughput and faster? And a lot of this is driven just by the economics of breeding programs. So you need to measure these important things to make selections, and obviously labor and input costs and all of these things for doing field trials is becoming more and more limiting, more and more expensive. And so any innovations that you can do to keep your population size big, to be able to really accurately measure things and make really accurate selections, is going to be a big driver, I think, both from kind of an academic research interest, wanting to do big populations for genetic studies and for breeding, but then also from the private sector,
right,
thinking about, okay, how do you maintain these big populations, evaluate them really quickly, move material through the program.
Right.
Yeah.
Jesse, wheat's a global crop. It's a staple crop.
Yeah.
Traditionally, it's always had this wholesome
Yeah,
perception.
yeah.
Last number of years has gotten a little bit of a black eye. Not correctly so, but a bit of a black eye. What are your thoughts on this, and how does it impact your breeding direction?
Right. So I think there's kind of two scopes on that. Maybe the first one is kind of just the reality that like wheat is still one of or the most important staple crops around the world, and so just like for lunch, we had some nice baguettes, and I think the vast majority of Americans and the global population still consuming wheat every day of the week, and so I think a lot of it just got caught up in one of these things. There was a lot of media hype. Got to have some story that's a little bit edgy and make you feel uncomfortable. So I think in that, and you get a lot of people asking questions like, I really like to eat bread or this or that, and I'm worried it's bad for me, kind of thing. And so I think the reality is, and for the vast majority, that it's an ancient crop. We've been eating it for thousands of years, and so it's.
And perhaps there's 1%
in
of the population.
Yeah, in that way you could say it's generally regarded as safe, kind of thing. So part of it, and then you get into these things like worrying about celiacs and worrying about like the wheat belly kind of thing. The first on that is like, yeah, wheat's a very nutritious, high carb crop, right? So if you consume a lot of wheat and you don't have the exercise and a balanced diet, you're bound to gain weight. And so
Which we've always known.
And so so that's kind of, and it's just a sign of prospering societies and things like that. I think on the other one, the real reality that there is some serious effect for 1% of the population, and it does have a true allergy or true reaction to that. And so, and I've seen there's a lot of initiatives looking at like a celiac safe wheat, kind of identifying the reactive epitopes of the gliadins and being able to work on that. And so I think in the scope of, if you want to really push it out there and say like in the scope of the genome editing tools and the biotechnology we have today, it's not incomprehensible that you could build a wheat plant that makes a beautiful loaf of bread and would be like non-reactive for celiac.
Right.
And so.
Well, and maybe that's part of the answer to my next question is so where do you see wheat going in the next 5 to 10 years? Nice simple question.
Right. So we talk about this a lot actually in the scope of, I think you're going to see, at least in my mind, maybe a little bit of segmenting between a commodity crop and then these specialty wheat crops that have really high value traits. And so yeah, definitely wheat's going to keep pushing as a commodity. If you're eating it as staple for every meal, you're going to just need to produce as much wheat as you can and keep that at kind of the same quality levels. At the same time, there's growing interest in both consumers, food companies, of having these specialty traits, whether it's something that fits into like their milling and baking process, or it's something that has special consumer added benefit, health benefits on top of that. You think about kind of these ancient grain kind of phenomenon that's going on, and not necessarily that is scientifically couched in direct health benefits, but it's really wrapped in increasing these nutrient levels, increasing the healthy compounds in wheat. And so I think there's going to be more and more in that, and then recognizing that with that consumer draw and the demand, that you can actually focus breeding efforts towards developing those type of varieties.
Absolutely. Jesse, is there anything that we haven't touched on that's important for us to talk about from a wheat perspective?
I don't think so. I think one of the big things that's really coming in wheat is completing the wheat genome this year, and obviously with wheat being a huge genome, polyploid, like multiple genomes, very complex. It's been a never kind of a never-ending process. But there's a huge international effort and community behind this. A lot of really great technology that's come to fruition over this last year. And so you're going to see that coming out like end of this year, first part of next year. And I think that's going to really set the stage for a whole new era of wheat genomics. And so we've seen this in rice and we've seen this in corn, other big crops. It's like once you get those really solid reference genome information, that it really accelerates all of the molecular breeding and the genomics and everything. And then that will be a direct translate into better and faster wheat breeding.
Which is what we're all looking
Yeah,
for. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Jesse, thanks very much for your time.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.